Sergio Perez has been one of the most criticised drivers in F1 recently, with all the right reasons. So as delivering 28 points in the last 8 races, it's definitely not enough to keep his seat alive from 2025 onwards. But there is a mounting threat for the Mexican driver that he might lose his seat even before the next season, as the team will likely have a meeting after the Singapore Grand Prix when they will see what options they have on the table. With Lawson's future now being more and more certain with Racing Bulls, could we see Perez out of the Austrian team in 2024? More importantly, how will this reflect on the entire landscape in the Red Bull camp? Red Bull have found themselves in a very difficult situation because of their poor upgrades that have been led by Pierre Wache, and all of a sudden, from a car that was able to win races with 20 seconds of advantage, they've turned into a team that's failed to win 5 races in a row. On top of that, Perez's form has taken a great dip even before this 5-race winless streak, which is why his future at Red Bull was discussed after the Belgian Grand Prix. But while there were growing concerns that this was the last race for the Mexican driver in the Austrian team, with Ricciardo set for a promotion and Lawson getting his seat in Racing Bulls, the situation has taken a sudden shift and Red Bull decided to continue with Perez for the remainder of 2024. Even with this decision of Red Bull, the future of Perez is all but certain because Helmut Marko said it himself that the cards will be reshuffled again in 2025 when he expects a lot of changes to come on the grid. A lot of reports were made that Perez's sponsors, in the form of Carlos Slim's companies as well as Liberty Media, have put great pressure on Red Bull to keep the Mexican driver throughout 2024, because the Mexican Grand Prix is coming, and if Perez isn't racing on his home turf, then the popularity as well as the attendance will drop massively. This has definitely put Red Bull in a very difficult situation, because they've been vastly criticised for choosing money over performance when they're having drivers like Lawson and Tsunoda who are doing everything they can in order to be promoted to a greater seat and far greater responsibility. But they might as well get their chance sooner rather than later. For starters, the RB20 will continue to be a troublesome car if we're to believe the words of Helmut Marko. Elaborating on this situation to a greater extent, Helmut Marko said, "During the summer break, nothing happens for a fortnight, which means no work on the car. We have to solve our problems and find out where the fault lies, because we no longer have a balance in the car if you compare the current situation with the first 3 races. But it is difficult to estimate how soon that will happen. I don't think the big solution will come at Zandvoort. We're brainstorming intensively and also have several ideas, but I cannot say yet what we will implement and how." This is definitely not good news for Perez, even though the team has admitted that they will resort to a version very similar to the first 5 races of the season, just so that they can help him with understanding the car to a greater extent, as well as fighting for podiums yet again. But the situation's quite desperate for Perez. The only reason why he's holding on to the 7th seat in the Drivers' Championship is because of Russell's disqualification in Spa, and he's the only one out of the top 8 drivers to have never won a race in 2024. In a season in which McLaren and Mercedes now have constant 2 cars fighting for the race wins ahead, this is definitely hurting Red Bull's chances to hold on to the Constructors' Championship, because they're just 42 points ahead of McLaren, and Ferrari as well as Mercedes are not that far behind either. Further bad news for Perez might be the fact that even Verstappen has started to feel less confidence with the car. And although both of these drivers have a different style of racing, having full confidence with your car is ultimately what you need in order to defend the championship. But compared to 2023 and 2022, Verstappen admitted that this is now definitely not the case, and when talking about the RB20 in a greater extent, he said, "I probably push harder than I did last year. It's just not coming anymore to have these great lap times. So then I guess it just means that we're a bit slow and we have work to do. Simple as that." Even if we're to ignore this statement from Verstappen, Wache has talked about how the upgrades are not working as they would have wanted them to, and this is putting the car at a greater risk of underperforming. We know for a fact that Max has the talent to extract every single millisecond of performance out of the car, but the same cannot be said for Perez, who is constantly looking for an excuse, whether it's in the tyres of the car, the setup, or anything else that's not related to him. And the most bizarre thing is that Perez is adamant that he will see the end of his contract beyond 2025, despite all of the talks that's been surrounding him in the past couple of months, which is something that will likely be re-talked about in the following period after the Singaporean Grand Prix. Marko openly stated that Lawson is not available for other teams, and that we will have an answer on his future with the team in September. And therefore, considering the fact that even Red Bull had him as a top candidate to replace Perez, we cannot fully exclude a bold move that would see a lineup of Verstappen and Lawson in 2025. Be that as it may, Horner has emphasized how important it is for Red Bull and Perez to regain the form that they've had in the first 5 races of the season, and when talking about this matter in a greater extent, the team principal of Red Bull said, "What is so confusing for us is that the season started so well with him and then tailed off. He did a super job in qualifying. Obviously we need to go through and understand the issues in the race. We've got the time to do that and analyze that and work with him." A huge dip in Perez's self-confidence can definitely be located in Spa, where he started second in a car that was an absolute rocket ship throughout the entire course of this weekend, only for him to end up P8 and behind his teammate Verstappen, who finished P5. Both of them were promoted as a position due to Russell's situation, but nevertheless it showed again how poor of a race Perez had, and this is something that Lawrence Barretto has spoken about in his recent column, believing that Perez will likely get replaced by Ricciardo sooner rather than later. Elaborating on this situation, Barretto wrote, "Ricciardo would likely get the nod. It is believed Red Bull must give Lawson a seat at one of their teams for 2025 by September, otherwise he's free to go elsewhere. Red Bull does not want to lose him. If Ricciardo's form drops, Lawson is the candidate to replace him for the next season." Obviously, there are a lot of uncertain situations in Red Bull, because if we're to look at Ricciardo's form, we would understand that he's not in the best possible situation to replace Perez as well, as Marco stated that the team would have done this if he had been exceptionally faster compared to Tsunoda. But with the Japanese driver now being 10 points ahead of his teammate, it is more likely that the 23-year-old would be more likely to get a seat next to Verstappen, according to the CEO of Racing Bulls, Peter Bayer, who believes that if these constantly good performances of Tsunoda continue, then he will definitely get a call from the Austrian team. Talking about this, Bayer said, "Helmut Marko said it himself. In German, you say a swallow doesn't make a summer. What it means is that if Yuki keeps racing on this level consistently, he will be considered for a seat in Red Bull Racing." The mission for Tsunoda, according to Bayer and Racing Bulls, is to enable him to move through the ranks and to ultimately receive a seat next to Verstappen, because now that the Dutchman's future with Red Bull is all but certain, given the drop in performance of the RB20, everything is wide open for 2025. Talking about this mission, Bayer said, "Moving Tsunoda through the ranks and promoting him to Red Bull is exactly our mission, and that is something that we've been given by the shareholders. And if that means that he needs another season next to a very strong Ricciardo, that could be another option. It can also be an option to say that, okay, we now believe he's ready, so then we will talk to Lawson. We're not in a hurry despite all of the people who think we are, because we do have all the options in our hands." With all of this in mind, what do you think is the best decision for Red Bull regarding the second seat? And more importantly, do you think that they will find themselves in a troublesome environment with all of the choices they have? Let us know in the comments below, and once you do that, make sure to click on the video that appears on your screen right now.